12,000 years ago, the world may have been home to a forgotten civilization, evidence buried under ice, stone, and myth. The textbooks tell one story, the stones tell another. In Turkey, massive stone pillars stand in perfect circles, carved when humans were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. In Egypt, water erosion marks the Sphinx, patterns that predate the pharaohs by thousands of years. Across the Pacific, identical flood myths echo from cultures that never met. These aren't conspiracy theories. They're physical anomalies that demand explanation. Graham Hancock spent 30 years following these breadcrumbs. What he found challenges everything we learned in school about human history. The mainstream archaeologists call him a pseudoscientist. The evidence he presents makes them uncomfortable, because if he's right, even partially right, then our entire understanding of human civilization needs rewriting. The ruins at Göbekli Tepe were deliberately buried 11,000 years ago. Someone wanted them hidden. The question that keeps archaeologists awake at night is simple. Why would hunter-gatherers build something so sophisticated, then bury it? The answer might lie in what happened 12,800 years ago. A cosmic impact, global flooding, the end of the Ice Age, and possibly the end of something else. This isn't about aliens or magic. It's about human capability, about what our ancestors knew and what they lost. The evidence sits in plain sight, carved into stone, encoded in myth, waiting beneath the waves. The academic establishment has a narrative to protect, careers built on timelines, textbooks that need selling, but the stones don't care about academic consensus. They just stand there, impossibly old, impossibly precise, whispering their secrets to anyone willing to listen. The hill looked like nothing special. Local farmers in southeastern Turkey called it Potbelly Hill, Göbekli Tepe in Turkish. For generations, they plowed around the scattered stones that poked through the soil, just another rocky outcrop in a landscape full of them. But in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt saw something different. Those weren't natural rocks breaking through the earth. They were the tops of T-shaped pillars, massive ones, arranged in deliberate circles. What Schmidt uncovered over the next 2 decades rewrote the textbook on human history. These weren't just old stones. They were impossibly old. Carbon dating placed them at 11,600 years. That's 7,000 years before Stonehenge, 6,000 years before the first cities in Mesopotamia. The pillars weigh up to 20 tons each. They're carved with intricate reliefs, foxes, lions, spiders, vultures, all rendered with artistic sophistication. Some stand 18 feet tall. The limestone was quarried from bedrock, shaped with precision, then somehow transported and erected in perfect geometric arrangements. According to everything we thought we knew, the people who built this were hunter-gatherers, small bands of nomads following animal herds. They weren't supposed to have agriculture. They weren't supposed to have the social organization to coordinate hundreds of workers. They definitely weren't supposed to have the engineering knowledge to move 20-ton stones. But there the stones stand, undeniable. Schmidt's team has excavated less than 5% of the site. Ground-penetrating radar shows at least 20 more stone circles waiting underground. The deeper they dig, the older the structures get. And paradoxically, the more sophisticated they become. The newest layers, the ones closest to the surface, show cruder construction, smaller stones, simpler carvings. It's as if the builders were forgetting how to build, losing their skills generation by generation. Then comes the real mystery. Around 10,000 years ago, someone deliberately buried the entire complex. Not destroyed, buried, carefully, intentionally. They filled in the circles with rubble and dirt, preserving them like a time capsule. Why would you bury something that took generations to build? The orthodox archaeological explanation struggles here. They suggest it was a ritual site, perhaps for ancestor worship. But that doesn't explain the burial. It doesn't explain the sophisticated astronomy encoded in the pillar arrangements, alignments that track the precession of the equinoxes with mathematical precision. Graham Hancock offers a different interpretation. What if Göbekli Tepe wasn't built by hunter-gatherers at all? What if it was built by the survivors of something much older, a civilization that existed before the Great Catastrophe. The timing matters here. Göbekli Tepe's construction begins right after the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to Ice Age conditions that lasted 1,200 years. This period ended abruptly around 11,600 years ago with massive flooding and temperature spikes, exactly when the first stones were raised at Göbekli Tepe. The carvings might tell the story. One pillar, Pillar 43, has been dubbed the Vulture Stone. It shows a vulture with a sphere above its wing, a headless human figure, and various animals in specific positions. Computer analysis by researchers at the University of Edinburgh suggests these symbols form a star map, one that dates to 10,950 BC. The sphere above the vulture's wing aligns with the position of the sun during the summer solstice in that exact year. But more significantly, this date coincides with a meteor shower from the Torrid Stream, the same meteor stream that many researchers now believe caused the Younger Dryas impact event. Were the builders commemorating a cosmic catastrophe, recording it in stone so future generations would remember? The site's deliberate burial takes on new meaning in this context. Perhaps it wasn't abandoned, it was protected, hidden for safekeeping when the builders realized their world was ending, when they knew the knowledge would be lost, but hoped the stones would survive. Mainstream archaeology resists this interpretation. It requires accepting that human civilization is far older than believed. It means acknowledging that our ancestors were more sophisticated than we've given them credit for. It opens doors that academic careers have been built on keeping closed. But Schmidt himself, before his death in 2014, admitted something profound. He said Göbekli Tepe was the first human-built holy place. He called it a discovery that changed everything. In private conversations, he went further, suggesting that what they were uncovering was evidence of a lost chapter in human history. The excavation continues today. Each season brings new discoveries that challenge the timeline further. Recently, they found evidence of a massive water channel system, engineering that shouldn't exist in the Stone Age. They found perfectly drilled holes in solid basalt, requiring tools we don't think existed yet. The drilling itself presents a puzzle that archaeology can't answer. These aren't crude holes hammered through stone. They're precise, circular, with parallel sides that maintain consistent diameter through several inches of the hardest rock. Modern replication attempts using the supposed Stone Age tools, flint and wooden drills with sand abrasive, produce rough, conical holes that look nothing like the ancient examples. The water channel system is equally perplexing. It's not a simple drainage ditch. The channels show evidence of sophisticated hydraulic engineering, carefully calculated gradients, collection pools, distribution systems. This implies not just engineering knowledge, but mathematical understanding of flow rates and pressure dynamics. The site also challenges our understanding of prehistoric social organization. Building Göbekli Tepe would have required feeding hundreds of workers, organizing shifts, training skilled craftsmen, maintaining tools. All of this implies a level of social complexity that hunter-gatherers supposedly didn't possess, unless they weren't hunter-gatherers. Recent discoveries support this radical possibility. At Karahan Tepe, another site near Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists found chambers carved from solid bedrock. One room contains a carved head emerging from the floor, a three-dimensional sculpture that required removing tons of bedrock from around it. The precision suggests advanced planning and three-dimensional visualization skills. These sites aren't isolated. 12 similar complexes have been identified in the region. All date to the same period, right after the Younger Dryas. All show the same sophisticated construction. All were deliberately buried. It's as if an entire civilization appeared, built these monuments, then vanished. The symbolism carved into the stones provides tantalizing clues. The animals aren't random. They appear in specific combinations that repeat across pillars. Snakes descending from above, birds with spread wings, predators surrounding prey. The imagery suggests narratives, stories being told in stone. Martin Sweatman's analysis of Pillar 43 revealed something extraordinary. The animal positions correspond to constellation positions, but not just any night sky, the specific sky of 10,950 BC. The pillar appears to be a date stamp, marking the night of a cosmic event that was important enough to commemorate in 20 tons of carved limestone. The vulture on the pillar might represent the constellation Sagittarius. The sphere above its wing could be the sun. Together, they mark the sun's position during the summer solstice of that specific year. But why that year? The answer might lie in the torrid meteor stream. Earth passes through this stream twice yearly, in June and November. Most years it produces minor meteor showers, but the stream contains larger objects, dormant comet fragments that could devastate the planet if they struck. Evidence is mounting that exactly such an impact occurred around 10,950 BC. The Younger Dryas boundary layer contains nanodiamonds, magnetic spherules, and iridium, all indicators of cosmic impact. This layer appears simultaneously across North America, Europe, and the Middle East. Something struck the Earth with tremendous force. The headless man on Pillar 43 might represent death, mass death. The surrounding animals could be the constellations that witnessed the catastrophe. The entire pillar might be a memorial, a monument to a disaster that nearly ended humanity. But who carved it? The quality of workmanship suggests experienced craftsmen. The astronomical knowledge implies systematic observation over generations. The engineering capability requires accumulated expertise. None of this appears suddenly. It develops over time. Hancock suggests the builders were survivors, refugees from a civilization destroyed by the impact. They built Göbekli Tepe to preserve their knowledge, to warn future generations, to ensure someone would remember what happened. The deliberate burial makes sense in this context. As the survivors died out and their knowledge faded, they protected what they'd built. They buried it carefully, knowing that stone lasts longer than memory. They trusted that someone, someday, would dig it up and understand. We are that someone. We're uncovering their message, but are we understanding it? The stones of Göbekli Tepe aren't just ancient. They're a message, a monument to knowledge that was already old when it was built, the work of people who remembered something the rest of the world had forgotten. And they're not alone. Across the world, other impossible stones tell similar stories, if we're willing to listen. The Great Sphinx of Giza stares east toward the rising sun and has been staring for longer than anyone wants to admit. The official story is straightforward. The Sphinx was carved around 2500 BC during the reign of Pharaoh Khafra. It guards his pyramid, bears his face, represents his power. Case closed. Every Egyptology textbook says so. But the Sphinx itself tells a different story, written in water. In 1991, a Boston University geologist named Robert Schoch did something unusual. He looked at the Sphinx not as an archaeological artifact, but as a geological feature. What he saw made him question everything. The Sphinx sits in an enclosure, a pit carved from the bedrock of the Giza Plateau. The walls of this enclosure show deep vertical erosion patterns, fissures that cut straight down through the limestone layers, rounded channels that look exactly like water erosion. Here's the problem. The Giza Plateau hasn't seen significant rainfall for 5,000 years. The climate has been arid since at least 3000 BC. If the Sphinx was carved in 2500 BC, it should show wind erosion, horizontal patterns, not vertical ones. Schoch compared the erosion patterns to other structures at Giza that definitely date to the Old Kingdom period. The tombs cut into the same limestone show completely different weathering, the sharp, angular erosion you'd expect from wind and sand. Only the Sphinx enclosure shows water damage. For water to create those patterns would require centuries of substantial rainfall, the kind of rainfall Egypt last experienced during what climatologists call the African humid period, which ended around 5000 BC. Some of the erosion patterns suggest even older exposure, potentially dating back to 7000 BC or earlier. The geological evidence is compelling enough that when Schoch presented it at the Geological Society of America, his fellow geologists agreed with his analysis. The erosion patterns are unquestionably water erosion. The only debate was how old that made the Sphinx. The Egyptologists were less receptive. Mark Lehner, perhaps the world's leading Sphinx expert, dismissed Schoch's findings. He argued the erosion could be explained by salt crystallization or wet sand, from the occasional flooding of the Nile, but these explanations don't account for the specific vertical erosion patterns or their depth. Some fissures extend several feet into solid rock. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's former Minister of Antiquities, was more direct. He called Schoch's theory hallucinations and banned him from further research at Giza. The topic became radioactive in academic Egyptology, career suicide for anyone who pursued it. But the water erosion isn't the only anomaly. The Sphinx's head is disproportionately small compared to its body. The erosion on the head is minimal compared to the body. The quality of carving on the head is finer, more detailed. Everything suggests the head was recarved from something larger, something older. Computer analysis by New York forensic expert Frank Domingo showed that the face of the Sphinx doesn't match known statues of Khafra. The proportions are wrong. The facial structure is different. If it's meant to be Khafra, it's a remarkably poor likeness from a civilization known for its precise portraiture. Graham Hancock suggests a radical alternative. What if the Sphinx originally had a lion's head to match its lion's body? What if it was carved during the age of Leo, when the constellation Leo rose directly in front of the Sphinx at dawn on the spring equinox? That would date the original carving to around 10,500 BC. The astronomical alignment is precise. During the age of Leo, the Sphinx would have gazed directly at its celestial counterpart. This kind of astronomical monument building appears in cultures worldwide, structures designed to mirror the heavens on Earth. As above, so below, as the ancient texts say. There's more. Seismic surveys conducted by Thomas de Becky revealed anomalies beneath the Sphinx, hollow spaces, possibly chambers. The Egyptian authorities halted the survey before completion and refused permission for further investigation. Ancient texts hint at secrets beneath the Sphinx. The Roman historian Pliny wrote of a tomb beneath it. Arab texts from the Middle Ages describe underground passages. The sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce, dismissed by academics but oddly accurate about other discoveries, claimed there was a hall of records beneath the Sphinx's paw. In 1998, a small robot camera was inserted into a shaft behind the Sphinx's head. The footage showed a chamber, but Egyptian authorities immediately shut down the investigation. The footage was never released. Zahi Hawass claimed it showed nothing of interest. But then why the secrecy? The resistance from Egyptian authorities follows a pattern. Any research that might push Egyptian civilization earlier than 3100 BC faces immediate opposition. Any suggestion that the monuments might predate the pharaohs is dismissed without examination. But why? Egypt's tourism industry generates billions annually. The narrative of the pharaohs building the pyramids and Sphinx is central to that industry. Suggesting these monuments are twice as old, or older, would require rewriting every guidebook, every museum display, every documentary. More fundamentally, it would require acknowledging that Egyptian civilization inherited rather than invented, that they were the recipients of older knowledge, that the greatest monuments of Egypt might be the legacy of a forgotten predecessor. The ancient Egyptians themselves hinted at this. They spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked the earth and established civilization. They described this as a real historical period, not mythology. The Turin Papyrus lists kings ruling Egypt for thousands of years before the first pharaoh. Manetho, the Egyptian priest who wrote the history of Egypt for the Greeks, claimed that before the first dynasty of human pharaohs, Egypt was ruled by gods and demigods for precisely 24,925 years. Historians dismiss this as mythology, but what if it's cultural memory? The number itself is significant. It's suspiciously close to the 25,920-year cycle of precession, the time it takes for the Earth's axis to complete one full wobble. This suggests the ancient Egyptians understood precession, which requires systematic astronomical observation over millennia. The water erosion on the Sphinx suggests exactly such antiquity. It places the monument in an era that officially shouldn't have monumental architecture. An era when humans were supposedly just developing agriculture. An era that conventional archaeology insists couldn't support the workforce needed to carve a 240-foot-long statue from bedrock. Yet there it sits, weathered by rains that haven't fallen for 7,000 years. Robert Schoch continues his research despite professional ostracism. He's refined his dating, suggesting the original Sphinx could be even older than his initial estimates, possibly dating to the end of the last ice age, to that same crucial period around 10,500 BC that keeps appearing in the alternative timeline. Recent discoveries support his theory. The Sphinx Temple, built from blocks quarried from the Sphinx enclosure, shows the same water erosion. The Valley Temple nearby displays identical weathering patterns. These structures are connected, part of a complex that predates dynastic Egypt. The blocks from the Sphinx enclosure weigh up to 200 tons. They were somehow lifted and positioned to build the adjacent temples. The logistics of this operation, in the Stone Age, boggle the mind. Yet the evidence is undeniable. The blocks match the negative spaces in the enclosure like puzzle pieces. Underground, the mysteries deepen. A network of tunnels connects the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid. These aren't natural caves. They're carved passages. Some have been explored, others sealed by Egyptian authorities. What they're hiding remains unknown. In 1993, Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a robot up a shaft in the Great Pyramid. It found a door with copper handles. The exploration was halted. 9 years later, another robot drilled through the door and found another door. That exploration was also terminated. The pattern is consistent. Discovery followed by suppression, as if there's something about pre-dynastic Egypt that must remain hidden, something that would fundamentally alter our understanding of human history. The Sphinx guards its secrets well, but the watermarks don't lie. Something was happening at Giza long before the pharaohs, something important enough to commemorate in stone, something that required moving millions of tons of limestone with a precision we struggle to match today. The question isn't whether the Sphinx is older than we're told. The geology proves that. The question is how much older, and more importantly, who built it? In 1929, workers renovating Istanbul's Topkapi Palace made an unusual discovery. Rolled up in a dusty corner, they found a gazelle skin parchment covered with intricate drawings. It was a map, but not just any map. This was the Piri Reis Map of 1513, and it showed something impossible. The map showed the coastline of Antarctica. Not Antarctica covered in ice, Antarctica's actual coastline, as it exists beneath miles of glacial ice. A coastline that hasn't been visible for at least 6,000 years. A coastline we didn't even know existed until 1958, when seismic surveys finally revealed the land beneath the ice sheet. Admiral Piri Reis was a Turkish naval commander and cartographer. He drew his map in 1513, just 21 years after Columbus reached the Americas. On the map itself, he wrote extensive notes explaining his sources. He claimed to have used 20 older maps, including charts from the ancient Library of Alexandria. The map shows the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and at the bottom, that impossible Antarctic coastline. The proportions are wrong by modern standards, but when Charles Hapgood, a professor at Keene State College, analyzed it in the 1960s, he made a startling discovery. The map uses what's called an azimuthal equidistant projection, centered near Cairo. This is a sophisticated mathematical projection that preserves accurate distances from the center point. It's the kind of projection used for aerial navigation today. When Hapgood adjusted for this projection, the coastlines aligned with disturbing accuracy. The US Air Force's Strategic Air Command reviewed Hapgood's analysis in 1960. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Ohlmeyer wrote in his official assessment that the coastline had to have been mapped before it was covered by ice. He called this conclusion the most logical and, in all probability, the correct one. The ice core samples from Antarctica tell us that the coast shown on the map has been under ice for a minimum of 6,000 years. Some sections have been frozen for 15,000 years. Yet there it is on the map, Queen Maud Land's mountains and valleys, mapped with an accuracy we couldn't achieve until the 20th century. The Piri Reis Map isn't alone in this impossible knowledge. The Orontius Phineus Map of 1531 shows Antarctica in even greater detail. It depicts mountain ranges that match seismic surveys. It shows rivers and fjords where we now know they exist under the ice. The interior is marked as ice-free, with flowing rivers, suggesting it was mapped during a warmer period. The Bausch Map of 1737 shows Antarctica divided into two landmasses. This is correct. East and West Antarctica are separated by a below sea level rift filled with ice. We didn't confirm this until the International Geophysical Year expeditions of 1958. How did Bausch know? He claimed to have copied from ancient Greek maps. These maps suggest something profound. Someone was conducting sophisticated geographic surveys during the last ice age. Someone with the mathematical knowledge to use advanced map projections. Someone with the navigational capability to map coastlines across the globe. Graham Hancock calls them the ancient sea kings, a lost maritime civilization that explored and mapped the world before history began. The evidence extends beyond maps. Ancient texts describe sophisticated navigation techniques that shouldn't have existed. The Polynesians navigated thousands of miles of open ocean using star charts and wave patterns. The Phoenicians had secret sailing routes they guarded with their lives. The Chinese Admiral Zheng He's fleet included ships over 400 feet long in the 1400s. But the maps push us back much further. Charles Hapgood spent years analyzing these portolan charts, medieval maps of impossible accuracy. They appeared suddenly in the 13th century with no developmental history. From the beginning, they showed coastlines with precise longitude measurements, something European sailors couldn't determine accurately until the invention of the marine chronometer in 1761. The medieval mapmakers claimed they were copying older sources from Constantinople, from Alexandria, from archives that traced back to ancient times. Each copy introduced errors, but the core geographic knowledge remained, knowledge that medieval sailors couldn't have obtained themselves. Professor Hapgood made another disturbing discovery. Many of these maps showed glacial features in northern Europe, but not current glaciation. They showed Ice Age coastlines from 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. They showed the English Channel as dry land. They showed islands in the Mediterranean that are now underwater. The maps remember a different world. Take the Zeno map of 1380. It shows Greenland ice-free, with mountains and rivers in the interior. Modern radar surveys have confirmed these features exist, under 2 miles of ice. The last time Greenland was ice-free was before the current ice age began. Or consider the Haji Ahmed map of 1559. It shows a land bridge between Alaska and Siberia, the Bering Land Bridge that disappeared 12,000 years ago. It accurately depicts the Caspian Sea and other bodies of water at Ice Age levels. How could a 16th century Ottoman cartographer know about Ice Age geography? Critics argue these are coincidences, misinterpretations. They claim the Antarctic coastline on the Piri Reis Map is actually South America bent out of shape, but this doesn't explain the mountain ranges, the river systems, the accurate placement of islands that weren't officially discovered until centuries later. It doesn't explain how multiple independent maps show the same impossible features. The ancient Sea Kings. Hypothesis offers an explanation, a maritime civilization that existed before the end of the last ice age, sophisticated enough to navigate the globe, advanced enough in mathematics to use spherical trigonometry, organized enough to conduct systematic geographic surveys. This civilization would have thrived when sea levels were 400 feet lower, when coastlines were different, when islands existed that are now underwater, when Antarctica's coast was accessible, at least partially ice-free during the warmer periods of the Ice Age. Then came the meltwater pulses. Between 15,000 and 11,000 years ago, the ice sheets collapsed in stages. Sea levels rose catastrophically, sometimes 40 feet in less than 500 years. Coastal civilizations would have been obliterated, their cities drowned, their harbors submerged, their maritime infrastructure destroyed. But their maps survived, copied and recopied by cultures that inherited them without understanding their origin, preserved in archives from Alexandria to Constantinople to Baghdad, fragments of geographic knowledge from a drowned world. The mathematical sophistication of these maps reveals something else about their creators. They understood the Earth was a sphere. They could calculate longitude, which requires precise timekeeping. They used complex map projections that we didn't rediscover until the Renaissance. The implications ripple outward. If the maps are genuine, then human civilization is older than we thought. If ancient navigators could map Antarctica, what else could they do? What other knowledge did they possess? What other evidence lies beneath the waves? Marine archaeologists estimate that over 95% of potential underwater archaeological sites remain unexplored. The technology to explore deep water sites has only existed for decades. Every year, new discoveries push back the timeline. Submerged cities off India, monument complexes off Japan, stone circles in Lake Michigan. The Yonaguni monument off Japan is particularly intriguing. It's a massive stepped pyramid structure underwater. Geologists debate whether it's natural or artificial, but the straight edges, right angles, and apparent stairways suggest human modification. The last time it was above water was 12,000 years ago. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Cambay, sonar has detected geometric structures 120 feet underwater. They appear to be the remains of a city, complete with roads, buildings, and drainage systems. Carbon dating of recovered artifacts suggests an age of 9,500 years. The maps point to where we should look. They mark coastlines that no longer exist, islands that have vanished, lands that are now ocean floor, each one a potential site where evidence of the ancient sea kings might survive. But perhaps the most important message of the maps isn't geographic, it's temporal. They prove that knowledge can survive catastrophe, that information can persist across millennia if preserved correctly, that even when civilizations fall, their achievements can echo forward through time. The Piri Reis Map hangs in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace Museum today. Tourists walk past it without understanding its significance. Just an old map, they think. Interesting, but not earth-shattering. They don't realize they're looking at evidence of a lost chapter in human history, a chapter written by navigators who sailed seas we've forgotten existed, who mapped lands we insist were impossible to map, who left us directions to our own forgotten past. If only we're brave enough to follow them. Every culture on Earth tells the same story. A great flood that destroyed the world, a handful of survivors, a new beginning for humanity. We know Noah's Ark from the Bible, Utnapishtim's boat from the Epic of Gilgamesh, Manu's ship from Hindu tradition, but there are hundreds more. The Hopi speak of the destruction of the Third World by water. The Maya describe a flood that ended the previous age. The Greeks told of Deucalion's flood. The Chinese wrote of Gunyu controlling the great waters. Mainstream historians dismiss these as myths, borrowed stories, local floods exaggerated into global catastrophes. But the details are disturbingly consistent, and the geology is starting to confirm what the myths always claimed. The flood happened, not the biblical flood that covered the entire Earth, but something almost as devastating, a series of super floods that transformed the planet between 15,000 and 11,600 years ago. Events so catastrophic, they burned themselves into human memory. The evidence comes from an unexpected source, the channeled scablands of eastern Washington. In the 1920s, a geologist named J. Harlan Bretz proposed something that got him laughed out of academic conferences. He claimed that the bizarre landscape of eastern Washington, massive canyons, enormous gravel bars, giant ripple marks, had been carved by a flood of unimaginable proportions. The geological establishment was committed to uniformitarianism, the idea that landscapes form slowly over millions of years. Catastrophic flooding was biblical nonsense. Bretz was ridiculed for 40 years. Then they found the source of his flood. Glacial Lake Missoula, a body of water the size of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario combined, had been dammed by a wall of ice during the last ice age. When that dam broke, it released 500 cubic miles of water in less than 48 hours. The water rushed across the landscape at speeds over 60 miles per hour, depths exceeding 400 feet. The flood carried boulders the size of houses. It carved the Grand Coulee in days. It created waterfalls that would have dwarfed Niagara. The discharge rate exceeded the combined flow of all rivers on Earth today by a factor of 10. And it happened repeatedly. The ice dam reformed and broke dozens of times. Each flood added to the catastrophic reshaping of the landscape. But Lake Missoula was small compared to other Ice Age lakes. Glacial Lake Agassiz covered much of central Canada, larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined. When its ice dams failed around 12,900 years ago, it dumped thousands of cubic miles of fresh water into the North Atlantic. The influx was so massive it shut down the Gulf Stream, triggering the Younger Dryas, a return to Ice Age conditions that lasted 1,200 years. The meltwater didn't just flood, it changed the planet's climate system. These weren't gradual sea level rises. The geological record shows three massive meltwater pulses. Meltwater Pulse 1. A, around 14,600 years ago, raised sea levels by 60 feet in less than 500 years. Meltwater Pulse 1b, around 11,500 years ago, added another 40 feet. In between, smaller pulses and regional floods devastated coastlines worldwide. For anyone living near the coast, which is where most humans have always lived, this was the end of the world. Graham Hancock has spent decades collecting flood myths and comparing them to geological data. The correlations are extraordinary. Cultures describe multiple floods, matching the multiple meltwater pulses. They describe black rains, consistent with impact events throwing debris into the atmosphere. They describe the sun disappearing, matching the Younger Dryas' climate collapse. The Ojibwa people of North America preserve perhaps the most detailed account. They tell of the long-tailed heavenly climbing star, a comet that swept low across the sky and fragmented into multiple pieces. Where the fragments struck, they created the Carolina Bays, 500,000 elliptical depressions scattered across the eastern United States. For decades, geologists puzzled over the Carolina Bays. They're all oriented in the same direction. They all date to the same period, around 12,800 years ago. They show signs of extreme heat and pressure. Recent analysis suggests they're impact craters from an aerial burst event, fragments of a comet exploding in the atmosphere. The Younger Dryas. Impact hypothesis has gained significant support in recent years. Scientists have found a distinct layer of nanodiamonds, melt glass spherules, and iridium, all indicators of cosmic impact, at over 50 sites worldwide. This black matte layer dates precisely to 12,800 years ago. The impact would have detonated over the North American ice sheet. The heat would have instantly vaporized millions of cubic miles of ice. The resulting floods would have been beyond imagination, walls of water and slurry ice racing across continents. The water vapor thrown into the atmosphere would have fallen as torrential rain for weeks. This matches flood myths with eerie precision. Multiple cultures describe the flood beginning with fire from the sky, the rain lasting 40 days, the waters rising to cover all land, only those who reached high ground or built boats surviving. The physical evidence for these floods is overwhelming. Giant current ripples, gravel waves 30 feet high and 500 feet apart, cross eastern Washington. These ripples could only form under flowing water hundreds of feet deep, moving at tremendous velocity. Erratics, massive boulders carried far from their source, dot the landscape. Some weigh thousands of tons. They were transported inside icebergs or by water so powerful it could move mountains. The Dry Falls in Washington state is a fossil waterfall. When active, it was 3 miles wide and 400 feet high. The flow rate would have been 10 times greater than all current rivers combined. It existed for only days or weeks, carved by the superflood. The Aboriginal Australians have the oldest continuous culture on Earth, over 50,000 years. Their oral traditions describe the flooding of the continental shelf around Australia. They point to specific underwater locations where their ancestors lived. Marine archaeologists have confirmed human occupation sites exactly where the stories indicated. These aren't vague myths. They're accurate historical records preserved through oral tradition. The Greeks preserved remarkable details in the Atlantis account. Plato, writing in 360 BC, quoted Egyptian priests who told Solon that the destruction occurred 9,000 years earlier, around 9,600 BC. He described earthquakes and floods occurring in a single day and night, consistent with an impact event triggering massive seismic activity and tsunamis. The date is significant. 9,600 BC marks the end of the Younger Dryas, the final collapse of the ice sheets, the last of the superfloods. It's when Göbekli Tepe was being frantically built, when the Sphinx might have been carved, when the ancient Sea King's world was drowning. But the floods didn't just destroy, they erased. Consider what happens to a coastal civilization hit by a 40-foot sea level rise. Your cities are underwater, Your harbors are destroyed. Your agricultural land is salinated. Your population is scattered or dead. Within a generation, you've gone from civilization to survival mode. The archaeological record shows exactly this pattern. Advanced tool-making techniques disappear. Art becomes crude. Population crashes. In region after region, there's a clear break around 12,800 years ago. Complex cultures vanish, replaced by simpler ones. This is Hancock's smoking gun for a lost civilization. The floods didn't create the myths. They destroyed the civilization that the myths remember. The survivors would have been traumatized beyond comprehension. They'd watched their world end. They'd seen the sky burn, the earth shake, the waters rise. They would have told their children what happened, made sure they remembered, created rituals and stories to preserve the warning. Build on high ground. Watch the sky for comets. Remember the flood, because it will come again. The Hopi traditions are explicit about this cyclical nature. They say we're living in the fourth world. The first world was destroyed by fire, the second by ice, the third by water. Each destruction came when humanity forgot the sacred laws and fell out of balance. Hindu cosmology describes similar cycles. The yugas, vast ages that repeat endlessly. Each cycle ends in destruction and renewal. We're currently in the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness before the next reset. Modern climate science confirms that we live in an unusually stable period. The last 11,600 years, the entire span of recorded history, has been remarkably calm compared to the chaotic climate swings of the Ice Age. We've built our entire civilization during a brief intermission in a much longer, more violent story. Ice core data shows that climate can change dramatically in just years. The Younger Dryas began with temperature drops of 15 degrees Celsius in less than a decade. It ended even more abruptly, warming by 10 degrees in just 3 years. These aren't gradual transitions, they're climate catastrophes. The flood myths aren't fantasies, they're memories, warnings from our ancestors who survived the last time the world ended. They encoded these warnings in stories that could survive even if writing was lost, stories that could be remembered even if cities fell, stories that would make us remember that it happened before. And according to the cyclical worldview of almost every ancient culture, what happened before will happen again. The Taurid meteor stream is still there. Earth passes through it twice yearly. Most of the large fragments have been swept up, but astronomers calculate there's still a significant risk. A dark comet, one covered in non-reflective material, could approach undetected until too late. Meanwhile, the ice sheets are melting again, not from cosmic impact this time, but from human activity. The West Antarctic ice sheet is becoming unstable. If it collapses, sea levels could rise 20 feet in decades. The myths are speaking to us across millennia. The geology confirms their testimony. The flood happened. It can happen again. The only question is whether we'll remember the warning in time. The Great Pyramid of Giza is impossible. Not impossible to see or visit. Millions of tourists prove otherwise. Impossible to build with the technology the ancient Egyptians supposedly had. Every engineer who's seriously studied the problem reaches the same conclusion. We couldn't build it today without modern equipment. The numbers alone are staggering. 2.3 million blocks of stone, average weight 2.5 tons. The largest blocks weigh 70 tons. Total mass 6 million tons. Height when completed 481 feet. Base covering 13 acres. And here's the part that makes engineers scratch their heads. It's aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60 of a degree. The conventional timeline says it was built in 20 years. That means placing one block every 5 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 2 decades, without breaks, without mistakes, without modern machinery. The precision is what really breaks the conventional theory. The pyramid's base is level to within just 2.1 centimeters. Modern skyscrapers don't achieve that accuracy. The casing stones, before they were stripped off for building projects in Cairo, were polished to mirror finish and placed with gaps of less than 1/50th of an inch. You can't slide a credit card between them. The king's chamber contains a granite sarcophagus cut from a single block. The precision is mechanical. The corners are perfect right angles to within the thickness of a human hair. The surface is polished to optical flatness. Christopher Dunn, a manufacturing engineer with 40 years of experience, measured it with precision gauges. He concluded it required machine tools. The entire chamber is a mathematical marvel. Its dimensions encode pi and the golden ratio. It's positioned at exactly 1/3 of the pyramid's height. The granite beams above it weigh 70 tons each and were somehow raised 200 feet and positioned with millimeter precision. Egyptologists insist it was built with copper tools, wooden sledges, and ramps. Copper can't cut granite. It's physically impossible. Granite is quartz crystal, one of the hardest minerals on Earth. Copper is relatively soft. You'd destroy thousands of copper saws trying to cut one granite block. The Egyptians had bronze later, but bronze isn't much better against granite. The ramp theory has even bigger problems. To reach the top of the pyramid with a manageable slope, a ramp would need to be over a mile long. It would require more material than the pyramid itself. It would be the largest construction project in history just to build the ramp. And there's no evidence it ever existed. No remnants, no quarry sites, nothing. Engineer Marcus Schulte calculated that moving the blocks up a ramp would require 50,000 workers. But the plateau couldn't support that many people. There's no evidence of massive worker housing, no industrial-scale bakeries, no infrastructure for a workforce that size. The recent discovery of papyrus fragments describing pyramid construction doesn't solve the problem. They describe moving white limestone casing stones, the relatively soft outer covering. They don't explain the hard granite. They don't explain the precision. They don't explain the speed. Graham Hancock proposes a different scenario. What if the pyramid is older than claimed? What if the Egyptians inherited it rather than built it? The evidence for this is compelling. The Great Pyramid contains no hieroglyphics. Every other Egyptian monument is covered with them. Names, dates, dedications, religious texts. The pyramid has nothing. The only mark connecting it to Khufu is a cartouche found in a relief chamber. And that cartouche has been suspected of forgery since it was discovered by Howard Vyse in 1837. The forgery evidence is substantial. Vyse was running out of money and needed a major discovery. The cartouche contains spelling errors that match a book Vyse possessed. The paint runs into cracks that shouldn't have existed when allegedly painted. No other inscriptions appear anywhere in the pyramid. The pyramid's interior is bizarrely complex for a tomb. 3 chambers connected by precision-cut passages. Mysterious shafts that point to specific stars. The Grand Gallery, a corbelled masterpiece of engineering that serves no obvious purpose. If it's a tomb, it's unlike any other Egyptian tomb ever built. No mummy has ever been found in the Great Pyramid. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber was empty when first entered in 820 AD by Caliph al-Mamun. No burial goods, no canopic jars, no evidence it was ever used for burial. The mathematical encoding goes far beyond what the Egyptians supposedly knew. The pyramid's dimensions relate to the Earth's dimensions with disturbing accuracy. The perimeter of the base divided by twice the height equals pi. The length of the king's chamber is exactly 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the pole to the equator. These aren't approximations. They're precise to multiple decimal places. The pyramid also encodes the speed of light. The exact geographic coordinates of the Great Pyramid are 29.9792458 degrees north. The speed of light in a vacuum is 299,792,458 meters per second. This could be coincidence, but it's an extraordinary one. Christopher Dunn spent decades studying the pyramid from an engineer's perspective. His conclusion was revolutionary. The Great Pyramid wasn't a tomb. It was a machine, a power plant. The precision wasn't ceremonial. It was functional. The evidence he presents is technical but persuasive. The pyramid's dimensions create a resonant cavity. The granite in the king's chamber contains high concentrations of quartz, a piezoelectric material that generates electricity under pressure. The mysterious shafts might have carried chemicals that, when combined, produced hydrogen. Dunn found evidence of advanced machining throughout the pyramid. Drill holes that penetrated granite at impossible rates. Saw marks indicating feed rates that modern diamond-tipped saws struggle to match. Surface finishes that require precision grinding equipment. The drill holes are particularly revealing. They show spiral grooves indicating a drill that penetrated granite at 0.1 inches per revolution. Modern diamond drills achieve only 0.0002 inches per revolution in granite. The ancient drills were 500 times more efficient than our best technology. In the Cairo Museum sits a collection of stone vessels that shouldn't exist. Thousands of them, found in the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. They're cut from the hardest stones: granite, basalt, diorite. They're hollowed out with walls as thin as paper. Some have long necks narrower than the bowl, making them impossible to hollow out by hand. Engineer Christopher Dunn tried to reproduce them with modern tools. He couldn't. The precision required computer-controlled ultrasonic drilling. The ancient versions are more precise than what we can achieve today. These vessels are attributed to the earliest dynasties of Egypt. When Egyptian civilization was supposedly just beginning, they appear suddenly, fully developed, with no learning curve. Then the quality decreases over time. Later dynasties made crude copies in softer stones. They were imitating something they couldn't reproduce. This pattern appears throughout Egyptian history. The oldest monuments are the most sophisticated. The pyramids of Giza are engineering marvels. The later pyramids are rubble piles that collapsed. The precise granite boxes in the Serapeum couldn't be reproduced in later periods. The magnificent statues were increasingly poorly copied. It's technological decline, not advancement. The same pattern appears worldwide. The oldest structures at Baalbek in Lebanon include stone blocks weighing 800 tons. The Romans built on top with blocks 1/10 that size. The oldest walls in Peru feature polygonal masonry so precise you can't slip paper between stones. The Incas built cruder walls on top. The implication is clear, but heretical. These cultures didn't develop these technologies. They inherited them. They found ancient structures and built around them. They discovered ancient artifacts and tried to copy them. They were cargo cults, worshipping the remnants of something greater. If the Great Pyramid is older than claimed, how old is it? Robert Bauval discovered that the 3 pyramids of Giza mirror the 3 stars of Orion's belt, but not as they appear today. The match is perfect for 10,500 BC, when Orion was at its lowest point in the precessional cycle, the same date that keeps appearing, the age of Leo, the end of the Younger Dryas, the time of the floods. The shafts in the pyramid support this dating. They point to specific stars, but not the stars of 2500 BC. The southern shaft of the King's Chamber points to where Orion's belt would have been in 10,500 BC. The southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber points to Sirius at the same date. The pyramid might be a monument to that lost world, built with technology we've forgotten, encoding knowledge we're only beginning to rediscover, standing as proof that our ancestors were more capable than we've been taught. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect isn't what the pyramid is, it's what it means. If the pyramid was built with lost technology, where did that technology go? If ancient civilizations were more advanced than believed, why did they disappear? And most disturbing, if they couldn't prevent their own destruction with all their capabilities, what chance do we have? The pyramid stands as both achievement and warning, proof of what humans can accomplish, evidence that accomplishment doesn't guarantee survival, a 6 million ton reminder that civilizations rise and fall, leaving only stones to mark their passing. We study it, measure it, theorize about it, but we can't build it. And that gap between what was possible then and what's possible now might be the most important message the pyramid has to offer. When the Spanish conquistadors burned the Mayan codices in 1562, they destroyed the written history of an entire civilization. Thousands of books containing centuries of accumulated knowledge turned to ash in a single day. Bishop Diego de Landa oversaw the burning, proud of destroying what he called superstition and lies of the devil. 4 books survived. From those 4 books, we've learned that the Maya possessed astronomical knowledge that rivals our own. They calculated the solar year to 365.2420 days. We measure it at 365.2422. They predicted eclipses centuries in advance. They tracked the cycles of Venus with an error of just 2 hours over 500 years. If 4 books contain that much knowledge, what did we lose in the thousands that burned? This pattern of destruction repeats throughout history. The Library of Alexandria, the greatest repository of ancient knowledge, burned at least 3 times. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, destroyed by the Mongols. The Imperial Library of Constantinople, lost to the Fourth Crusade. Each time, centuries of accumulated wisdom vanished. But some knowledge survived, hidden, protected, passed down through secret traditions. Graham Hancock has spent decades tracking these knowledge keepers, groups who preserved ancient wisdom through dark ages and catastrophes. What he's found suggests that the most important knowledge was never written down at all. It was encoded in myths, monuments, and initiatic traditions that could survive even when libraries burned. The pattern is always the same. After a catastrophe, mysterious teachers appear. They bring knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, architecture, mathematics. They're described as tall, bearded, pale-skinned, unusual for the regions where they appeared. They establish mystery schools. They build monuments. They encode knowledge in myths. Then they vanish. The Sumerians called him Oannes. He emerged from the sea and taught them the arts of civilization. Writing, law, agriculture, architecture, all the foundations of culture. The texts are specific. He taught them everything at once, and nothing material has been added by way of improvement since. The Egyptians knew him as Thoth, the bringer of wisdom, the inventor of writing, the teacher of sacred geometry. He was said to have written 42 books containing all knowledge, books that were hidden before the flood and recovered after. The Aztecs called him Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. He arrived from the east after a great flood. He forbade human sacrifice, unusual for Mesoamerica. He taught calendar systems, agriculture, and astronomy. When he left, he promised to return. The Incas knew him as Viracocha. He appeared at Lake Titicaca after a great flood destroyed the world. He could move mountains and create springs. He taught the ancestors of the Inca, then walked away across the Pacific Ocean. These aren't independent myths. They're variations of the same story, a story of knowledge preserved and transmitted after catastrophe. The mystery schools these teachers founded share remarkable similarities. Whether in Egypt, Greece, India, or Peru, they taught the same core concepts: sacred geometry, the precession of the equinoxes, the relationship between macrocosm and microcosm, the immortality of consciousness, the cyclical nature of time. They also shared the same methods: initiation through trials, knowledge revealed in degrees, outer teachings for the public, inner teachings for initiates, death and rebirth rituals, the use of sacred plants to induce altered states, the construction of monuments that encoded their teachings. The monuments are perhaps the most enduring legacy. Angkor Wat in Cambodia is a map of the sky on Earth. Its layout mirrors the constellation Draco as it appeared in 10,500 BC, the same date again. The temple's dimensions encode the precession of the equinoxes. Its bas-reliefs depict the churning of the cosmic ocean, a Hindu myth that's actually an astronomical allegory. The temple complex covers 500 acres with precision that rivals modern construction. The moat is perfectly rectangular over a distance of 3 miles. The stones fit without mortar yet have survived centuries of earthquakes. The entire complex aligns with cardinal directions to within a fraction of a degree. But Angkor Wat was built in the 12th century AD. Why encode the sky from 10,500 BC? Unless the builders were preserving older knowledge, commemorating an important date, maintaining a tradition they inherited but perhaps didn't fully understand. The same encoding appears at Stonehenge. The Sarsen circle represents the solar year. The blue stones track lunar cycles. The entire monument functions as a calculator for predicting eclipses. But the astronomical alignments are calibrated for a specific era, around 2500 BC when it was supposedly built, but also encoding much older observations. Recent excavations found that Stonehenge was rebuilt multiple times over thousands of years. Each rebuilding maintained the astronomical alignments. The knowledge was preserved even as the builders changed. The site itself might be far older. Post holes dated to 8000 BC suggest wooden predecessors to the stone circles. The knowledge keepers didn't just preserve astronomy, they preserved technology. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a Greek shipwreck, is a 2,000-year-old computer. It uses differential gears, technology we thought was invented in the 17th century. It calculates lunar and solar eclipses, tracks planetary positions, and even accounts for the elliptical orbit of the moon. The mechanism is so sophisticated that it took us until 2006 to fully understand how it worked. X-ray tomography revealed 30 bronze gears inside a corroded lump the size of a shoebox. The manufacturing precision equals 19th century Swiss clockwork. But here's the problem. It's too perfect to be a prototype. This technology must have developed over centuries. There must have been earlier, simpler versions, more advanced versions, a whole tradition of mechanical computation that's completely missing from the historical record. Where did it come from? Where did it go? The Baghdad battery presents similar questions. Found in Iraq, dated to 250 BC, it's a clay jar containing a copper cylinder and iron rod. Add an acidic electrolyte, vinegar or wine, and it generates electricity. Replicas produce about 2 volts. Mainstream archaeologists insist it wasn't a battery. But then what was it? And why do ancient Mesopotamian texts describe procedures that sound exactly like electroplating? Why do some ancient artifacts show signs of electrochemical processing? These aren't isolated anomalies. They're glimpses of lost knowledge traditions. The Dogon people of Mali have preserved astronomical knowledge that shouldn't exist. They've known for centuries that Sirius has an invisible companion star. They know its orbital period, 50 years. They know it's incredibly dense. They call it Potolo, and say this knowledge came from amphibious beings called the Nommo. Sirius B wasn't discovered by Western astronomy until 1862. It wasn't photographed until 1970. It's completely invisible without a telescope. Yet the Dogon have been performing rituals based on its 50-year orbit for generations. The Aboriginal Australians preserve even older knowledge. Their oral traditions describe the formation of geographical features that geology confirms happened 10,000 years ago. They point to underwater sites where their ancestors lived. They describe extinct megafauna with accuracy that matches fossil evidence. These cultures are keeping knowledge that predates written history, knowledge preserved through songs, stories, and ceremonies, knowledge that survives because it's woven into the fabric of culture itself. Graham Hancock argues that this is how the real knowledge survived the catastrophes, not in books that can burn, not in cities that can flood, but in traditions that regenerate with each generation, in monuments that can be rebuilt, in myths that can be retold. The knowledge keepers knew that civilizations rise and fall. They knew that catastrophes are cyclical. They designed their preservation methods accordingly, anti-fragile systems that get stronger under stress. When the Library of Alexandria burned, the knowledge it contained was already encoded in the pyramids. When the Mayan books burned, the astronomical cycles were already carved in stone at Chichen Itza. When cities flooded, the survivors carried the stories to higher ground. The question is, what knowledge are they preserving for us? The monuments point to specific dates. The myths describe specific events. The traditions encode specific warnings. They're trying to tell us something about cycles, about catastrophes, about what happened before and what will happen again. Modern science is beginning to confirm these warnings. The torrid meteor stream that likely caused the Younger Dryas impact is still there. Earth passes through it twice a year. The sun's magnetic field is weakening. The Earth's magnetic poles are moving. Climate change is accelerating. The knowledge keepers knew we'd reach this point. They encoded their warnings in forms that could survive dark ages and reach us when we'd need them most, when we'd have the technology to understand them, but might have forgotten the wisdom to heed them. The knowledge has been kept. The question now is whether we're ready to receive it. In the mountains of Peru, at an altitude where breathing becomes difficult, sits a fortress that shouldn't exist. Sacsayhuamán overlooks the city of Cusco with walls that defy explanation. The stones are monsters, some weigh over 300 tons. They're fitted together without mortar in a complex three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. The joints are so precise that after 500 years of earthquakes, you still can't slip a knife blade between them. Each stone is unique. They have complex polygonal faces, some with 12 or more angles. They interlock in ways that would require computer modeling to design today, yet they fit perfectly, as if the massive stones were momentarily made plastic and pressed together. The Incas claimed they didn't build Sacsayhuamán, they found it. They told the Spanish that it was built by an earlier people who could make the stones light. The Spanish chroniclers dismissed this as primitive superstition. But how else do you explain it? Modern engineers have tried to replicate just one wall section using current technology. They failed. The logistics alone are overwhelming. Quarrying stones that size, transporting them up mountains, shaping them to precise tolerances, lifting them into position, and doing it all at 11,000 feet where the air contains 40% less oxygen. The conventional explanation that the Incas used bronze tools, wooden rollers, and ramps collapses under scrutiny. Bronze can't shape granite. Wooden rollers would be crushed by 300-ton loads. Ramps would need to be engineering marvels themselves. The stone surfaces show unusual characteristics. They have a glazed appearance, as if exposed to intense heat. Some joints show evidence of vitrification. The rock has been partially melted and fused. This requires temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius. Researcher Jan Peter de Jong found similar evidence at other megalithic sites. Using electron microscopy, he discovered that the stone surfaces have been modified at the molecular level. The crystals are aligned in ways that don't occur naturally. It's as if the stone was temporarily altered to make it workable. This isn't unique to Peru. In Lebanon, the Roman Temple of Jupiter sits atop something far older, the foundation platform of Baalbek. The Romans built with impressive 400-ton blocks, but beneath them are 3 stones that dwarf anything the Romans achieved. The trilithon, 3 blocks weighing between 800 and 1,000 tons each. They're fitted so precisely that the joints are nearly invisible. They're laid perfectly level over a distance of 200 feet. In the quarry, half a mile away, sits an even larger stone. The stone of the pregnant woman weighs 1,650 tons. It was abandoned before completion, still attached to bedrock at one end. Tool marks suggest it was being prepared for transport before work suddenly stopped. How do you move a 1,650-ton stone? The largest mobile crane today can lift 1,200 tons under perfect conditions. It requires weeks of setup, a specially reinforced surface, multiple support vehicles. The crane itself weighs thousands of tons and moves on hundreds of wheels. The Romans had none of this. Neither did whoever built the original platform they built upon. Arab texts claim Baalbek was built before the flood by a race of giants. Not literal giants, perhaps, but people with capabilities that seemed gigantic. People who could move mountains, or at least mountain-sized stones. The same impossible engineering appears in Egypt. The Assyrian at Abydos is built from megalithic blocks in a style completely different from the temple above it. It's made from massive granite blocks fitted without mortar. The architecture is stark, functional, almost modern in its simplicity. It resembles the Valley Temple at Giza more than anything from dynastic Egypt. When it was excavated, it was filled with sand containing fossils of an era when the Sahara was green. The structure shows water erosion similar to the Sphinx enclosure. Core drilling revealed that it sits on virgin bedrock. There's nothing beneath it. It's incredibly ancient. Inside the Valley Temple at Giza are blocks that challenge comprehension. Some weigh 200 tons. They're stacked 3 high. The joints between them are precise to thousandths of an inch. After detailed survey, engineer Christopher Dunn concluded they must have been machined. But the most impossible engineering might be the precision boxes. The Serapeum of Saqqara contains 24 granite boxes. Each weighs about 100 tons, lid and box combined. They're cut from single blocks of granite, with internal and external surfaces polished to mirror finish. Christopher Dunn measured them with precision gauges. The surfaces are flat to within 0.0002 inches, the thickness of a bacteria. The corners are perfect right angles to similar tolerance. This exceeds the precision of most modern machine shops. To achieve this precision in granite requires sophisticated technology, diamond-tipped saws, high-speed drilling, computer-controlled milling. Yet these boxes are attributed to dynasties that supposedly had only bronze tools. Engineer Arlen Andrews proposed a thought experiment. Give a modern granite workshop unlimited budget and time. Ask them to reproduce just one Serapeum box using only bronze tools. They'll refuse, because it's physically impossible. The bronze would wear away to nothing before making a dent in the granite. So how were they made? Graham Hancock and others suggest we're looking at evidence of lost technology. Not alien technology, human technology. Techniques developed over millennia by the lost civilization. Methods that seem like magic to us because the underlying science has been forgotten. There are hints about what this technology might have been. Edward Leeds Kalnin, a Latvian immigrant, single-handedly built Coral Castle in Florida. He moved blocks weighing up to 30 tons. He worked alone, at night, in secret. When asked how, he said he had rediscovered the secrets of the pyramids. He spoke of magnetism and finding the sweet spot of stones. Witnesses reported seeing him float stones into position. They described stones moving as if they weighed nothing. Leeds Kalnin was 5 feet tall and weighed 100 pounds, yet he moved blocks that should have required massive cranes. After his death in 1951, investigators found strange equipment in his workshop: magnetic wheels, radio tubes arranged in patterns, copper coils wound in specific geometries, equipment that didn't match any known technology. Tibetan acoustic levitation provides another clue. Multiple Western observers in the 1920s and 30s reported seeing monks move large stones using sound. They arranged drums and trumpets in specific patterns. They created precise rhythms and frequencies. The stones would vibrate, then rise. Dr. Jarl, a Swedish doctor, claimed to have filmed this in Tibet. The film was allegedly confiscated by the English Scientific Society. True or not, the physics is sound. Acoustic levitation is real. We use it today in laboratories to suspend small objects. The question is whether it can be scaled up. The ancient texts are full of references to sound and stone. The walls of Jericho falling to trumpets, Amphion building, Thebes by playing his lyre, causing stones to move into place, the Aboriginal songlines that sing the landscape into existence. Were these myths or memories? Modern experiments with resonance show extraordinary effects. The right frequency can shatter glass. Ultrasound can drill through metal. Acoustic focusing can generate enough pressure to indent steel. Every material has resonant frequencies at which it behaves in unexpected ways. John Keely, in the late 1800s, demonstrated machines that allegedly used sympathetic vibratory physics to produce anti-gravity effects. Witnesses, including engineers and scientists, swore they saw heavy objects lose weight and float. Keely took his secrets to the grave, and his machines couldn't be replicated. The megalithic builders left clues about their methods. Many sites show evidence of drill holes and channels that seem to serve no structural purpose. Some researchers suggest these were for acoustic resonators, tuning the stones, creating standing waves, manipulating the vibratory properties of matter. The placement of megaliths often follows patterns that make acoustic sense. Stone circles create resonant chambers. Passages amplify specific frequencies. Chambers are dimensioned to mathematical ratios that correspond to harmonic intervals. At Newgrange in Ireland, the passage tomb has remarkable acoustic properties. Certain frequencies resonate so strongly that the stones seem to sing. Researchers found that drumming at specific rates induces altered states of consciousness. The architecture itself is a technology for transforming awareness. But perhaps we're thinking about this wrong. We assume the ancients must have used mechanical methods because that's what we would use. But what if they had a completely different relationship with matter? What if consciousness itself was their technology? This sounds mystical, but modern physics suggests consciousness and matter are more connected than we assumed. The observer effect in quantum mechanics, the role of intention in random number generators, the documented effects of meditation on physical systems. The ancient traditions all emphasize the power of focused consciousness. The Hindu siddhis, supernatural powers gained through yoga. The Egyptian emphasis on the power of the word. The Hermetic principle that all is mind. What if the megalithic builders had developed this to a science? What if their initiates could enter states of consciousness that allowed direct manipulation of matter? What if the monuments were built not just with physical technology, but with psychic technology we've forgotten how to access? This would explain the universal tradition of initiation. the emphasis on spiritual preparation before building, the association of megaliths with altered states, the persistent legends of stones that moved at the builder's command. It would also explain why we can't replicate their achievements. We're looking for external machines when the technology was internal. We're searching for tools when the builders themselves were the tools. The impossible engineering of the ancients forces us to confront our assumptions. Either they had physical technologies we haven't discovered, or they had consciousness technologies we've forgotten, or both. Either way, they were more capable than our history books admit. The stones stand as proof, massive, precise, impossible, yet undeniably there. They challenge us to expand our understanding of what humans can achieve. They whisper that we've forgotten more than we've learned. And perhaps most importantly, they demonstrate that impossible is just another word for forgotten. The serpent appears everywhere in ancient cultures, coiled around the world tree, rising from the pharaoh's crown, wrapped around the caduceus, guarding sacred knowledge, bringing wisdom or destruction, sometimes both. This isn't coincidence. The serpent encodes something fundamental, something the ancients understood and we've forgotten. Graham Hancock's research suggests it might be the most important symbol our ancestors left us. The pattern starts in the sky. There's a constellation called Draco, the dragon. Due to the precession of the equinoxes, Draco's star Thuban was the pole star around 3000 BC. The constellation seemed to guard the celestial pole, around which all other stars rotated. The eternal serpent coiled around the axis of heaven. But Draco has another significance. The constellation resembles the path of the torrid meteor stream, the cosmic serpent that brings destruction, the same meteor stream that likely caused the Younger Dryas' impact, the fire serpent that ended the antediluvian world. The Maya knew this connection. Their cosmic serpent, Kukulkan, was both creator and destroyer. It brought knowledge to humanity, but also cyclical catastrophe, the feathered serpent that flies through the heavens, the Aztec Quetzalcoatl, the Chinese dragon controlling wind and rain. But the serpent symbol goes deeper than astronomy. In India, they speak of Kundalini, the serpent power coiled at the base of the spine. Through meditation and practice, this energy can be awakened. It rises through the chakras, activating each energy center. When it reaches the crown, enlightenment occurs. The serpent brings gnosis, direct knowledge of reality. The Egyptian Uraeus serpent rises from the pharaoh's third eye. The position exactly corresponds to the pineal gland, what Descartes called the seat of the soul, the gland that produces DMT, the most powerful psychedelic known, the chemical that floods the brain during birth, death, and mystical experiences. The caduceus shows two serpents spiraling around a central staff. It resembles DNA's double helix so precisely that some researchers suggest the ancients somehow perceived molecular structure, but it also matches the Ida and Pingala of yoga, the solar and lunar energy channels that spiral around the central Sushumna. The serpent is simultaneously cosmic, biological, and consciousness. As above, so below, encoded in a single symbol. Graham Hancock's experiences with ayahuasca revealed another dimension to the serpent mystery. This Amazonian brew, used for thousands of years, consistently produces visions of serpents. Not ordinary snakes, cosmic serpents made of light, conveying information directly to consciousness. Anthropologist Jeremy Narby documented this in The Cosmic Serpent. Amazonian shamans claim their medical knowledge comes from the serpents seen in ayahuasca visions. They've identified hundreds of medicinal plants from the 80,000 species in the rainforest. When asked how they knew which plants to use, they consistently answer, "The serpents told us." The shamans describe DNA-like visions decades before they could have known about molecular biology. They speak of animated chromosomes, living light encoding information, the blueprint of life revealing itself as serpentine intelligence. Is this hallucination or perception? Modern research into psychedelics suggests these experiences might be more than imagination. DMT consistently produces encounters with serpentine entities that seem autonomous. They convey complex information, teach impossible things, show the architecture of reality. Dr. Rick Strassman's DMT research at the University of New Mexico documented hundreds of these encounters. Volunteers with no prior knowledge reported nearly identical experiences, serpentine beings made of light, downloading information directly to consciousness, revealing the code behind reality. The ancient mystery schools used similar techniques. The Eleusinian mysteries involved drinking kakaon, likely containing ergot alkaloids similar to LSD, initiates reported life-changing visions, contact with the gods, understanding of death and rebirth, knowledge that couldn't be spoken, only experienced. The serpent was always present in these mysteries. Python at Delphi, the serpent in the Garden of Eden offering knowledge, the Ouroboros swallowing its tail, the rainbow serpent of Aboriginal Dreamtime, each one a gateway to forbidden wisdom. But why forbidden? The biblical story gives a clue. The serpent offers knowledge of good and evil, consciousness of duality, self-awareness, the ability to see reality's deeper structure. God expels humanity from Eden, not as punishment, but as consequence. Once you see behind the veil, you can't return to innocence. This matches the shamanic experience precisely. Ayahuasca is called the vine of the dead because it shows what lies beyond ordinary perception. Users report seeing the matrix of reality, the interconnection of all things, the intelligence within nature, knowledge that transforms but also burdens. The serpent brings gnosis, but gnosis has a price. The Gnostics understood this. They revered the serpent as the bringer of liberation. The demiurge, the false god, wanted to keep humanity ignorant. The serpent revealed our true nature as beings of light trapped in matter. This knowledge was considered so dangerous, the Gnostics were systematically eliminated. Their texts, hidden in jars at Nag Hammadi, weren't discovered until 1945. They describe reality as a simulation, consciousness trapped in a material matrix, archons, artificial intelligences, maintaining the illusion, the serpent as the glitch in the program, revealing the truth. Modern physics increasingly supports this worldview. The universe appears to be information-based. Matter emerges from quantum fields. Consciousness might be fundamental rather than emergent. Reality resembles a vast computation more than a mechanical system. The serpent symbol might encode this understanding, the wave nature of energy, the spiral of galaxies and DNA, the oscillation between order and chaos, the carrier wave of consciousness itself. Graham Hancock suggests the serpent visions are real perceptions of an otherwise invisible aspect of reality. The ancients developed technologies, psychedelic and meditative, to access this dimension. They encoded their discoveries in serpent symbolism that appears worldwide. The serpent mounds of North America trace this knowledge physically. The Great Serpent Mound in Ohio is a quarter-mile-long earthwork. Its head aligns with the summer solstice sunset. Its coils mark lunar events, but ground-penetrating radar revealed something extraordinary. It's built over a crypto-explosion structure, possibly from an ancient meteor impact. The serpent marks the site of cosmic impact, exactly as the myths describe. The sky serpent that brings destruction and transformation. The crater becomes sacred. The trauma become teaching. This pattern repeats globally. Serpent symbols at impact sites. Dragon legends at locations of cosmic catastrophe, the Aboriginal rainbow serpent creating landscapes through violent emergence, cultural memory of real events encoded in mythological language. But the deepest secret might be biological. The pineal gland, the third eye, produces not just DMT, but also melatonin and other consciousness-regulating chemicals. It's sensitive to magnetic fields. It contains magnetite crystals similar to those in migrating animals. It might be our interface with non-local consciousness. The pineal resembles a pine cone, hence its name. Pine cones appear throughout ancient art, held by Sumerian gods, topping the Pope's staff, decorating Angkor Wat. The largest pine cone sculpture in the world sits in Vatican City. They're preserving the symbol even if they've forgotten its meaning. The serpent rising to the pine cone, Kundalini reaching the pineal, energy activating the consciousness interface. The technology isn't external, it's built into our biology. We're wired for transcendence, designed for gnosis. But modern life calcifies the pineal. fluoride in water, electromagnetic pollution, absence of darkness, disconnection from natural rhythms. We're systematically disabling our consciousness technology. The ancients warned us, guard the serpent wisdom, keep the pineal active, maintain the connection. They knew this interface was fragile, that civilizations could forget how to use it, that the serpent could sleep for millennia. But they also promised the serpent would rise again, the return of Quetzalcoatl, the awakening of Kundalini, the activation of consciousness, not through external saviors, but through internal awakening. The serpent's secret is that we are the technology we're searching for, the interface between matter and consciousness, the bridge between earth and sky, the cosmic serpent incarnated in biological form. We've been looking for evidence of lost civilizations in stones and structures, but the greatest technology they possessed might have been consciousness itself, and that technology isn't lost, it's sleeping, coiled at the base of our spine, waiting to rise. As above, so below. This phrase, attributed to the mythical Hermes Trismegistus, appears in various forms across ancient traditions: the Emerald Tablet, the Vedic texts, Chinese philosophy, Egyptian sacred writings. It suggests reality operates on corresponding levels, the macrocosm reflected in the microcosm. Graham Hancock discovered that ancient sites worldwide are laid out as mirrors of the sky, not random orientations to celestial bodies, but precise terrestrial maps of celestial regions, Earth monuments positioned to reflect heaven's geography. The correlation is too consistent to be coincidental. The most famous example is the Giza complex. Robert Bauval's Orion correlation theory showed that the three pyramids match the three stars of Orion's belt, not just in relative position, but in relative brightness. The smaller third pyramid corresponds to the dimmer third star. But the correlation goes further. The Nile River corresponds to the Milky Way. Other pyramids match other stars in the Orion constellation. The entire Memphis necropolis is a ground map of the celestial realm, the Egyptians called the Duat. When was this map accurate? Due to precession, the match is perfect, not for 2500 BC when the pyramids were supposedly built, but for 10,500 BC, that date again, the age of Leo, the time when everything changed. Hancock found the same pattern at Angkor Wat. The temple complex mirrors the constellation Draco, but as it appeared in 10,500 BC, the temples are positioned to match the stars. The moats represent the celestial boundaries. The causeway angles match the constellation's orientation. Why would 12th century Cambodians build a map of the sky from 10,500 BC? The conventional explanation, coincidence, becomes absurd when you find the same pattern globally. Teotihuacan in Mexico mirrors Orion. The Hopi villages in Arizona are laid out as Orion. Thornborough Henges in England, 3 circular earthworks, match Orion's belt, all encoding the same celestial region, all pointing to the same era. The message seems clear. Pay attention to this time. Something important happened in 10,500 BC, something worth commemorating in millions of tons of precisely placed stone. But why mirror heaven on earth? The ancient texts suggest these sites were more than monuments. They were functional, devices for connecting earth and sky, interfaces between dimensions, technologies we'd call magical because we don't understand the science. Consider the pyramid texts. They describe the pharaoh's journey to become a star in Orion, not symbolically, literally. The pyramid was the launching mechanism. The shafts pointing to specific stars were trajectories. The ritual was a technology for consciousness transfer. This sounds like mythology until you examine the precision. The shafts are cut through hundreds of feet of solid stone to point exactly at Orion and Sirius at specific dates. The angles are calculated for precession. The entire structure is a stellar computer, calculating and marking celestial positions across millennia. Modern experiments reveal these structures have measurable effects. Russian researchers found that pyramid shapes alter the decay rate of organic matter. Seeds stored in pyramids show increased growth rates. Razor blades maintain sharpness longer. Water's molecular structure changes. The shape itself seems to concentrate and transform energy, not mystical energy, measurable electromagnetic and gravitational effects. The pyramid shape creates a resonant cavity. It focuses Earth's magnetic field. It generates negative ions. It creates standing waves. When you build these shapes at specific locations, aligned to specific stars, at specific scales, what are you creating? Nassim Harameyn's unified field theory suggests an answer. He proposes that space isn't empty, but full of energy at the quantum level. Matter is where this energy field curves and creates vortices. Consciousness might be the field becoming aware of itself through these vortices. Ancient structures might be designed to tap this field, to create coherent nodes in the planetary energy grid, to establish resonance between Earth's field and cosmic fields, to build antennae for consciousness itself. This explains the recurring sacred geometry. The golden ratio appears in pyramid dimensions, temple proportions, and megalithic layouts. The Fibonacci sequence, the Platonic solids. These aren't aesthetic choices, they're functional geometries that create specific energetic effects. The flower of life pattern appears at ancient sites worldwide: Egypt, China, India, Europe, always the same complex geometric pattern. It encodes the structure of space itself, how spheres pack in 3 dimensions, how energy organizes into matter, how consciousness crystallizes into form. Cymatic experiments show that sound creates these exact patterns. Vibrate sand or water at specific frequencies and sacred geometry emerges. The Sri Yantra, Hinduism's most sacred pattern, forms at a precise frequency. The ancient claim that the universe was spoken into existence gains scientific support. The mirror of heaven sites might be cymatic patterns at planetary scale, nodes where Earth's frequency creates standing waves, amplification points for planetary resonance, acupuncture points in Earth's energy body. Indigenous traditions have always known this. They call them power places, sacred sites, thin places where worlds meet. They conduct ceremonies at specific times when celestial alignments amplify the effects. They understand the Earth as a living being with energy meridians. Modern measurements confirm these places are different. Magnetic anomalies, gravitational variations, increased negative ions, altered radioactive decay rates, measurable effects on consciousness, increased alpha waves, altered perception, spontaneous mystical experiences. Paul Devereaux spent decades measuring these effects. He found that ancient sites consistently occur at geological anomalies, fault lines, mineral deposits, underground water. The builders weren't randomly choosing sacred locations. They were detecting and marking Earth's energy nodes. But detection requires sensitivity we've largely lost. The ancient traditions all describe practices for developing this sensitivity: meditation, fasting, sensory deprivation, psychedelics, techniques for quieting mental noise and perceiving subtle energies, training to become human instruments capable of detecting what our machines are only beginning to measure. The mirror of heaven sites might have been built by and for people with expanded perception, structures that are invisible to our diminished senses, but obvious to enhanced awareness, technologies that require consciousness as a component. This explains why we can't understand them. We're studying musical instruments with eyes that can't hear. We're analyzing consciousness technologies with materialist assumptions. We're looking for mechanical functions in psychic machinery. Graham Hancock's experiences with altered states revealed these sites differently. Under ayahuasca, the monuments become alive, energy patterns visible, connections between sites obvious, the mirror of heaven revealed as a functioning network. He's not alone in this perception. Increasing numbers of researchers are using consciousness-altering techniques to study ancient sites. They report consistent experiences. The sites are active, they're connected, they're waiting. Waiting for what? Perhaps for us to remember how to use them, to redevelop the perceptual capacities, to understand that consciousness and cosmos are linked, to realize the mirror of heaven isn't just ancient architecture, it's an invitation. The sites encode instructions. Stand here at this time. Align your consciousness with these stars. Resonate with these frequencies. Activate these dormant capacities. Remember what you forgot. The ancient builders created a planetary technology hidden in plain sight, not hidden from view, but hidden from limited perception, available to anyone who develops the eyes to see it, active for anyone who remembers how to switch it on. As above, so below, but also, as within, so without. The mirror of heaven isn't just reflected in monuments, it's reflected in us. We are the microcosm, walking temples, living pyramids, conscious interfaces between earth and sky. The monuments are reminders, stone libraries encoding the operating manual for consciousness, markers showing where the earth's power can be accessed, maps to our own forgotten capabilities. The mirror of heaven is waiting to be polished, waiting for consciousness to recognize itself in stone and star, waiting for the remembering that the ancients knew would come, the awakening they built their monuments to facilitate. The time they pointed to might be now. The stones remember what we've forgotten. 12,000 years ago, someone carved impossible pillars at Göbekli Tepe, then buried them for us to find. The Sphinx stares east through millennia of silence, weathered by rains that haven't fallen since the world was young. Maps drawn centuries before Christ show coastlines buried under miles of Antarctic ice. These aren't mysteries, they're messages. Graham Hancock has spent 30 years following these breadcrumbs. What he's found challenges the fundamental story of human history, not with speculation, but with stone, not with theory, but with measurable weathering patterns, astronomical alignments, and impossible precision. The evidence points to something extraordinary, a civilization that mapped the Earth when the ice sheets still covered Canada, that understood precession of the equinoxes before we invented writing, that could move 100-ton stones with a precision we struggle to match with modern machinery. They didn't disappear without a trace. They left traces everywhere, in monuments oriented to stars from 10,500 BC, in flood myths that describe geological events we've only recently confirmed, in sacred geometry that encodes the structure of reality itself. The catastrophe that ended their world was real, the Younger Dryas impact, the floods that raised seas by hundreds of feet, the black mat layer that marks destruction across continents. They watched their civilization drown and made sure we'd remember. But they encoded more than history. They preserved technology, not machines that rust, but consciousness techniques that regenerate. Not external tools, but internal capabilities. The serpent power, the mirror of heaven, the knowledge that consciousness and cosmos are connected. Every ancient tradition speaks the same message in different languages. We are more than we remember. Reality is more than it appears. Consciousness is the technology we're searching for. The monuments are instructions for remembering. The resistance from mainstream archaeology isn't really about dating disputes or technical arguments. It's about worldview. Accepting that civilization is older means accepting that progress isn't linear, that we've forgotten more than we've learned, that our ancestors were our equals, perhaps our superiors, in ways that matter. It means acknowledging that civilizations rise and fall, that advancement doesn't guarantee survival, that everything we've built could disappear like Atlantis beneath the waves. The monuments aren't just about the past, they're warnings about the future. The torrid meteor stream is still there. Earth passes through it twice each year. The sun's magnetic field is weakening. The poles are shifting. The same cycles that destroyed the ancient world are still turning. But perhaps that's not the real message. The monuments demonstrate that knowledge can survive catastrophe, that wisdom can be encoded in forms that endure, that even when libraries burn and cities flood, truth can be preserved in stone and myth and tradition. The ancient builders knew they couldn't save their world, but they could seed the next one. They created monuments that would survive, myths that would be retold, mysteries that would demand investigation. They trusted that eventually someone would understand. We are the someone they were waiting for. We have the technology to read their messages, ground-penetrating radar to find what they buried, computers to decode their astronomy, global communications to compare their myths. We're the first generation that can piece together the whole picture, but we're also the last generation that can ignore it. The signs are accelerating: climate change, magnetic pole shift, increased meteor activity, social collapse. the same patterns that preceded previous catastrophes. The cycles the ancients tracked so carefully are converging. The monuments aren't just about remembering the past. They're about preparing for the future, not with bunkers and supplies, but with consciousness, with the recognition that we are more than physical beings. That knowledge can transcend catastrophe. That consciousness itself is the continuity. The builders of Göbekli Tepe buried their temple to preserve it. The creators of the pyramids encoded their knowledge in geometry that would survive. The keepers of oral tradition wove truth into stories that would be remembered. They all understood the same thing. Physical civilization is temporary, but wisdom is eternal. The stones are speaking to us across 12,000 years of silence. Not about what was lost, but about what can be recovered. Not about their achievements, but about our potential. Not about their civilization, but about consciousness itself. Graham Hancock calls us a species with amnesia, but amnesia can be healed. Memory can be recovered. The fragments are all around us, in monuments, myths, and molecules, in the serpent coiled in our spine, in the stars reflected in ancient stones, in the forgotten chambers of our own consciousness. The textbooks tell one story, the stones tell another. The choice of which to believe isn't academic, it's existential. One story says we're the pinnacle of linear progress. The other says we're rediscovering what was known. One promises endless advancement. The other whispers of cycles and return. But the stones don't care what we believe. They stand there, impossibly old, impossibly precise, waiting for us to remember, waiting for us to wonder, waiting for us to wake up. 12,000 years ago, the world may have been home to a forgotten civilization. The evidence isn't buried anymore. It's not hidden. It's not lost. It's right there in front of us, carved in stone, encoded in myth, reflected in the stars, whispering its secrets to anyone willing to listen. Ancient civilizations, the hidden history,